So generally speaking, finding the least common denominator is finding the highest number of each of the factors in the given polynomials. So if your polynomials are just numbers or monomials, whatever, 8 and 12, you can try and figure out what the least common denominator is by factoring each number. So since 8 is 4 and 2, and 4 is 2 and 2, then technically 8 is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 2. 12 is 4 and 3, which is 2 and 2 and 3, like this. And so if you're trying to find the least common denominator between 8 and 12, well, if you look at 8, there are 3 2's. So you, in the least common denominator, need 3 2's. And in addition to that, when I look over here at the 12, I've got at least 2 2's, so I'm accounted for in that regard, but I need the 3, so I need to include an additional or a multiplicational 3. And so the least common denominator between 8 and 12 is whatever 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 is, or 4 times 6, which is 24. If you are asked to find the least common denominator between 3x to the third and 6x squared, well, you're looking for the highest number of each of the factors in the given polynomials. So I can think of 3x to the third as 3 times x times x times x. And I can think of 6 as 6, or 6x squared as 6 times x, but I can even think of 6 as 3 times 2 times x. And so when I look at this last line, there's a 3 in common. So instead of saying that the least common denominator between 3 and 6 is 18, it would actually be smaller than that. So I need a 3 in my least common denominator to account for the 3 in each case. I also need a 2 to account for this 2. Which just means that over here, in the process of finding the common denominator, I would multiply by 2. And then I need the highest number of each of the factors in the given polynomials, so I need 3 x's. In this case over here, I only have 2, so those 2 are already accounted for. There's an additional one, so I would ultimately be multiplying this one by an x if I was getting common denominators. So that would be 3 times 2 is 6, and x times x times x is x to the third. If I was asked to find the least common denominator between 2x squared plus 4x and 2x, the least common denominator is the highest number of each of the factors. So I can't just say, oh, well, let's just put a squared on there, or let's just put a plus 4x. I have to think about each of these polynomials in factored form. And this one on the left is the only one that can be factored. Because there's a greatest common factor of 2x, I can factor that out. And when I do that, I'm left with x plus 2. And then the other polynomial doesn't factor, just 2x. So technically speaking, this first polynomial has 3 factors. It has a 2, it has an x, and it has a quantity x plus 2. And then over here, let's match colors. In the second polynomial, I've got a 2, and I've got an x. So when it comes to building my least common denominator, I need that 2, but I only need it one time, because if you are thinking about the least common denominator, I don't need to make it 4. The least common denominator between just 2 and 1, 2 over here, 1, 2 over there is just 2. And then I need an x, and I only need one of them, because it's not like either polynomial by itself has an x squared in it. And then I also need this quantity x plus 2. So the entire least common denominator would be 2x times x plus 2. If I asked you for the least common denominator between x squared minus 9 and x plus 3, I would want to think of this as the highest number of each of the factors in the given polynomial. So x squared minus 9 can be factored into the quantity x plus 3 times the quantity x minus 3. So this polynomial has two factors, the red one and the blue one, x plus 3, x minus 3. I'll go ahead and write this in red just to see where we're going. The second polynomial doesn't factor, it's just x plus 3. So whether I put it in parentheses or not, it's only one factor. So when it comes to building the least common denominator, I need there to be a quantity x plus 3. But there's no need for me to write it twice, because over here, if I only have it one time, it's already taken care of. And then additionally, or multiplicationally, I need an x minus 3. So I need to multiply by x minus 3. So the least common denominator is x plus 3, x minus 3. So if there are no factors in common, if one of the denominators is x plus 7 and the other denominator is x minus 1, well, neither of those factor. They're just one factor. So the least common denominator would be x plus 7 times x minus 1. So if this was a fraction with a numerator and this was a fraction, I would decide this is the least common denominator, so okay, I would multiply by this and I would go about my business. It's only when there's some crossover that there's really no need to put an extra x plus 3 there. It just means you're going to have things to cancel out in the end, which we don't want to have to worry about extra of that if we don't